Okay, all right. So let me give you some quick background, and then I'll give you guys a chance to do some more talking. So after the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, there's this great paranoia in the United States about Japanese Americans and Japanese American disloyalty. And on February 19th, 1942, the president, Franklin Roosevelt, signs Executive Order 9066. Essentially, that executive order gave the military the authority to designate military areas from which any or all persons could be excluded. They could define a geographic area and remove people from it. The executive order did not mention Japanese Americans specifically. It was super vague. But when Roosevelt signed it, he and everybody else involved knew that it was targeting only Japanese Americans. It was designed to remove Japanese Americans from the West Coast. And despite the fact that this was a massive violation of the civil rights of these Japanese Americans, 2/3 of whom were American citizens, most of the American public supported the idea that we should forcibly remove Japanese Americans from the West Coast and throw them in what were initially called concentration camps. But as we started to realize what was happening in Germany, we essentially rebranded. And so like concentration camps was not a good term. So we started using euphemisms like internment camps and things like that. I don't use internment myself because I think it's a euphemism, but if you're uncomfortable with concentration camp in America, incarceration camp is kind of the prevailing language. So all Japanese Americans on the West Coast, about 120,000, are rounded up, forced out of their homes, and sent to these 10 camps in the American interior. And again, almost all Americans supported it because of the stories that they were hearing and telling each other about Japanese Americans. So one of the things we see kind of, I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but kind of like stretching up through the right side of this image is the West Coast of the United States. So we can see all the way from like Southern California all the way up to the Canadian border, right? All the way up California through Oregon into Washington. Good. So we're looking at a picture that's about the West Coast. And then towards the front, we see this guy kind of handing out TNT, right? Dynamite. What else do we see as we look at this image? Yeah. So there's a guy up here with the telescope. The Dr. Seuss thing, I think, really matters. So don't let me forget to come back to Dr. Seuss. So this is a political cartoon drawn by Dr. Seuss. I think it's 1942, might be early 1943. No, it's 1942. And the guy on the top with the telescope, he's looking across the Pacific, which means he's looking at what? Japan, right? So he's looking to Japan, and then we could read the title, Waiting for the Signal from Home. So what's that implying about the guy with the telescope? That despite the fact that he's Japanese American, his home is Japan, right? So the implication being the Japanese Americans are not really Americans, that they're living here, but they are fundamentally Japanese. A fifth column is a group that works from inside a society to destroy it, right? Sort of working covertly or secretly within the society to destroy it. So when it's labeled honorable fifth column, that's sarcastic, right? There's nothing honorable about Japanese Americans setting out to destroy the United States from within, but that's what they're doing. Number one, they're really happy, right? As they're picking up this TNT so they can go and do subversive things and destroy the United States from within. They're doing it really enthusiastically. The happiness matters in this, right? The Japanese Americans are not being forced to do this. They're not doing it against their will. They are excited and wholeheartedly in favor of this kind of activity. I think it matters that they all look the same, too, because it plays to a long historical fear in the United States about what people called at the time the yellow peril. The idea that there were so many people in Asia that they would eventually spill over the Pacific Ocean and take over the United States. So as we watch them stretching all the way up the West Coast, as they become these faceless masses, they are literally the yellow peril. For the ones that we can see, they all look the same because they're depicted with what were kind of standard racist stereotypes in visual imaging of Japanese Americans: buck teeth, thick glasses, scraggly mustaches, in all of these ways, right? And importantly, this was a cartoon drawn by Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss is not a hard right-wing racist thinker. Dr. Seuss is, during the war, kind of like the person you know him as a children's book author, like a liberal guy who wants to build a better world. The point being, when Dr. Seuss is producing work like this, it is the mainstream American thought. The story we told ourselves about Japanese Americans during the war was that they could not be trusted, that they were out to get us. The end result was the unconstitutional and profoundly unjust mass incarceration of Japanese Americans. So the stories we tell each other matter.